bringing together voices in child and youth healthcare. This is CAFC Presents.
CAFC would like to thank the following member organizations for their generous support of our knowledge translation activities: the IWK Health Centre, the Children's Health Foundation of London, the McMaster Children's Hospital Foundation, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Research Institute, the Children's Hospital Foundation of Manitoba, the Montreal Children's Hospital Foundation, the Holland Bloorview Children's Rehabilitation Hospital Foundation, and the Children's Hospital Foundation of Saskatchewan. We would also like to thank the following Keystone and program partners for their ongoing contributions that support all of CAFC's programs and activities. If you have any questions or comments for our panelists, please type them into the question box at any time during the presentation. You can also share your thoughts and questions on Twitter by tagging @CAFCTweets and using the hashtag CAFCPresents. All of our webinars are recorded and can be found on the CAFC Knowledge Exchange Network. Use the CAN to share these recordings with your colleagues or register an account and post comments, links, or other resources that you think will be of interest. And be sure to sign up for the CAFC Presents weekly email newsletter to stay up to date with upcoming webinars and our recorded webinar archive.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of CAFC Presents. I'm Lisa Stromquist, National Coordinator of Quality and Patient Safety at CAFC, the Canadian Association of Paediatric Health Centres. So before we get on with the session today, I'd just like to mention the 2016 CAFC Annual Conference, which is being held in Halifax, Nova Scotia this year from October 23rd to the 25th. So there's still plenty of time to register, so hopefully we'll see many of our CAFC Presents audience in person at the conference. So today's webinar is titled Implementing the ENFit Standards, Preparing for the Impact on Clinical Practice. So we're welcoming an excellent panel today to discuss the new ENFit standards that are being implemented this year and their potential impacts on pediatric practice across Canada. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the question pane in the control panel on the right side of your screen. So our first speaker today will be Tom Hancock, and he's the founder and executive director of the Global Enteral Device Supplier Association. It's a group of manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers of tube feeding devices. Tom leads the development, coordination, and global launch of the Stay Connected initiative. It's a collaborative effort to help introduce the ISO design standards for small bore connectors to reduce medical device tubing misconnections. Involved in the Small Bore Initiative since 2009, Tom works in cooperation with a host of other partner associations representing various healthcare professionals, practice experts, advocacy groups, and manufacturers and suppliers to ensure the healthcare community is aware, prepared, and ready to adopt new, safer connectors for medical devices. Tom has spent 20 years in healthcare as a marketer, business leader, and consultant. We also welcome Dr. Gina Rempel, who's a developmental pediatrician specializing in feeding and swallowing problems in children with medical complexity. As such, she is the medical lead on the in- and outpatient feeding, eating, and swallowing teams at Children's Hospital of Winnipeg and the Rehabilitation Centre for Children and the Manitoba Home Nutrition Program, through which all children who are enterally fed at home are followed. She is also the section head of the Complex Care and Chief Medical Officer of the Rehabilitation Centre for Children at SSCY Centre in Winnipeg. We also welcome Mary Ellen Lee, who's a Quality Improvement Officer at the WRHA Child Health Program in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She got her first position as a nurse at HSC Children's Hospital in 2005 in the medicine program. In 2011, she took on the position of a nurse educator and she took on the position of a nurse educator, and it was in this role that she learned more about the challenges with enteral feeding and the upcoming practice changes with ENFit. So right now, it's my pleasure to hand over the virtual podium to Tom Hancock.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. And the screen is visible to everyone, I hope?
The screen is visible. Looks good.
All right. Sorry, I just got to don't always rely on technology. It's usually a user problem. But
I
anyway,
understand.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this. session today. I am delighted to share with you and provide an update for you all on the Stay Connected initiative and ENFit and the low dose tip, and be able to hopefully answer any questions that you may have on the transition to these new ISO standard connectors. GEDSA, I'd like to start out, is the Global Enteral Device Supplier Association. It was formed in 2013, and our mission is to promote initiatives surrounding safe and optimal delivery of enteral feeding and connectivity. Pardon me, I share this slide for you to demonstrate that there are a couple things. One, there are lots of manufacturers that are engaged and involved in this effort. That it is a global representation of manufacturers and suppliers throughout the world that are part of this effort, and so one should feel confident that most, if not all, of the suppliers that you rely on today for enteral feeding devices are engaged in this effort to get to a place with where we have safer connectors and reduce the risk of tube misconnections. We also engage with a group of supporting organizations from around the country and around the globe. This is a list, and I won't go through all of them, but various practice groups, associations, standards groups. You may be familiar with ISMP, which is the Institution for Safe Medication Practices. We have GPOs engaged with us, like HealthTrust, Vizient, and Premier. The Joint Commission, the FDA is part of our effort, A.S.P.E.N, and a number of other associations that are working with us, including patient safety groups like Oley and Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation. We use them for two purposes. One is to help us get the message out, to raise awareness about ENFit and the transition, but also to provide feedback back to us on things that we could be doing better as an industry. So we're very appreciative of these organizations. I do want to take a step back, and this will likely be a review for many of you, but just in case, we want to remind everyone as to why the heck we're doing the introduction of ENFit. And it all is around this major concern or major issue called tubing misconnections. And I want to share with you some of the adverse events that have been captured over the years. One thing to keep in mind is, and many of you might be stepping back and thinking, well, this doesn't happen in my hospital or my institution. And that may or may not be true. But this problem that we have is not necessarily, doesn't happen all the time. It's not incredibly common. Folks are trained not to do this, but they still happen. And unfortunately, they're also very significantly underreported events. And even one death because of a tube misconnection is one death too many. So that is what we're up to, is solving. Some of the examples: IV tubing misconnected to a nasal cannula used to deliver oxygen, and the patient did survive, but after being treated for congestive heart failure. Feeding tube to a tracheostomy tube that resulted in a patient death of an infant. An epidural infusion set connected to a peripheral IV line, also resulting in a patient death. A feeding tube connected to an inline ventilator suction catheter, resulting in a patient death. And a heparin lock connected to an automatic blood pressure cuff, resulting in a patient death. And perhaps the one that's most shocking and disappointing to hear about is this example of a expectant mom and her fetus, unborn fetus, both did not survive a tubing misconnection. And it was a very troublesome situation because Robin was a young mom already, had a Derek, 3-year-old son, and she was pregnant with her second child. She had been having problems with vomiting and dehydration, so they decided they would admit her to the hospital for hydration, which you would think would be pretty straightforward, so that she would be able to deliver a baby. but instead of connecting the liquid feed bag to tube that entered her stomach, the nurse accidentally put the feed directly into her bloodstream, which is just, it's like pouring concrete into someone's vein. And immediately the fetus was on a fetal monitoring that arrested, and Robin watched while the fetal monitor showed that her baby had died. Robin then began to go into respiratory distress and died within a few minutes. So this is a horrific example of a tubing misconnection that should, hopefully all of us agree, should never, ever happen. And that is what we're trying to prevent. And it's important for us all to keep this in mind, particularly when we're hearing about transition and how painful it may be, and the problems of transition may be. We need to keep in mind Robin and Derek and these other examples that I provided of wrongful deaths that shouldn't have occurred. So what happened as a result of a lot of effort to look into this further is there was a standard effort that was established, ISO 80369, which is a small bore connector series of standards where we included technical experts, clinical experts, and regulatory standards experts from around the globe, and worked with them collaboratively to identify connectors that would be safe and, importantly, not misconnect with each other. I liken this series to swim lanes. So if you'd like to think about it, respiratory has its own swim lane, 80369-2. Enteral is 80369-3. And then you have urological, limb cuff, neuraxial, and intravascular, each of which should have their own designated connector in a series that are compatible with everything within this series, within the swim lane, and non-compatible with anything else outside of the series. Requirements are that are not connectable with others in the series, that are rigid or semi-rigid material. They pass rigorous misconnection, risk analysis, usability, and human factors testing, and of course, importantly, not connectable with a lure type of a system. The lure lock is something that is in use today, and that's part of the challenge that we have, is it's so commonly used across these categories. In the future, the lure lock will be designated specifically for intravascular or hypodermic use. And now we introduce the new design standard for enteral feeding, ENFit. ENFit is a name that we use to define the connector, 80369-3. It's a little bit easier to say, EN for enteral nutrition, FIT for fitment. And it does, as an industry, specify the direction of flow from a female, from the giving set standpoint, going into the male connector on the feeding tube side. And we'll get into that a little further. So currently you have a male step connector or Christmas tree that connects into a feeding tube port. In the future, that connection will look like more of a what we call a forcing function and a locking feature. So when you put the two together, you know that they're going to fit together and stay snug. The other pieces I mentioned, you'll have the female ENFit connector from the administration set going into the male connector on the feeding tube side. We also, we know that tubes are in place sometimes months, if not years, and so we know it's essential to have what we call a transition connector, which allows for backwards compatibility. In this slide, you'll see from the upper left portion the ENFit female coming from the giving set with the transition connector, that's the male part, that allows for a step connector that could then go into a traditional feeding tube or a legacy feeding tube. This is going to be in use for a period of time until we know that the feeding tubes have collectively been transitioned over to an ENFit connector. And the goal is to eliminate the need for any adapters long term. For many, an adapter is a dirty word, and we agree that those adapters are what help cause misconnections. And so we do believe it's necessary in the short term to allow for the backwards compatibility, but ultimately we're building towards a place where there won't be a need for a transition connector. We mentioned the administration set, so anything for a pump set, a gravity set, or other bolus feeding devices should have the ENFit female. And then the feeding tube side, NG tubes, G tubes, low profile devices, PEG tube, adapters on the end, and then J tubes would all have the ENFit male on the end. And that's the bottom right portion of the connector. It's also important to note that syringes will change as well. Many times people use oral, catheter, or Luer slip tip syringes for enteral use today. Again, cause for some of the misconnections that we see and wrong route delivery of fluids. In the future, you'll have to have an enteral specific syringe or an ENFit tip syringe to administer medication, flush, hydration, and for bolus feeding. One thing, as we were looking at the introduction of ENFit about the summertime last year, we had conversations with the clinical community and discussed the potential concern for dosing accuracy of small volume ENFit syringes. And that is due to the reverse gender orientation. This is something, by the way, that is consistent with what's in use outside the U.S., and I'll get to that in a second. But clinicians and pharmacists were indicating that dosing accuracy expectations were in the plus or minus 10% target range. From an industry perspective, we certainly looked at that very carefully and said we want to be able to accommodate that expectation or need. But unfortunately, there were not standards that were in place, neither ISO, AAMI, or any other type of standard that specified or required a certain amount of dose accuracy for oral or enteral syringes. And there's a big reason for that. One is that that oral syringes today, there's no standard for the dimensions of an oral tip syringe. And also, of course, an oral syringe normally will be administered orally into someone's mouth, and obviously there's no standard for a mouth as well. So there's no standard in place, and dosing accuracy is not a test performed by syringe manufacturers. So there really wasn't a baseline. So this was a challenge for the industry to look more closely at. We looked at the challenge, and the proposal was, after a lot of collaborative effort from the industry, is to identify a design called the ENFit low-dose tip syringe. And if you see in the upper portion of the slide, you see an illustration of an ENFit tip syringe with a low-dose tip inside. And that is an incremental inner lumen that allows for pardon me, compatibility to an ENFit male feeding tube. If you look at the lower portion of the slide, the lower right portion, you'll see a Luer lock on the left-hand side, and then the right side, an example of an ENFit low-dose tip. And you'll see that those designs are quite similar, and they function in a very similar way. But importantly, the designs are dimensionally different. The two will not be compatible with each other. Sorry. So what we did is we did performance testing on these low-dose tips, and we were able to demonstrate that the ENFit low-dose tip was consistent with enteral and oral tip syringes. We actually looked at 3 different versions from various manufacturers because there is no design standard for an oral tip syringe. And we wanted to get a baseline for what that looked like. And in fact, we found that it was within a plus or minus 10%, negative 7% to a positive almost 10%. In terms of dose accuracy, and by the way, we were looking at a 0.2 ml dose of medication delivered in a 1 ml syringe, and we were looking for that to be plus or minus 10%. And so you see the ENFit low-dose tip and the enteral oral were statistically similar in terms of the two, in terms of their dose accuracy, versus 2 other reverse orientation systems One is a proprietary system by a company called Vizient that is out there in use today, and another is a reverse system that's used in the United Kingdom today and available by many manufacturers. And both, we found, offer dose accuracy that is greater than what's expected, greater than the plus or minus 10% error range that pharmacists and physicians and nurses would expect to see. And so what we found with this is that ENFit low-dose tip was considered to be equivalent to enteral and oral use syringes today, and we believe is going to allow for delivery of an accurate dose. We also did usability studies across the world, and we did studies with pharmacists, nurses, and caregivers, and found that this low-dose tip would be consistent with how syringes are in use today. No significant differences were identified for syringes when filling or administering water or thicker liquids. No significant differences for syringes used between respondents that are pharmacists, nurses, or caregivers, and no significant difference for syringe use when filling from a dose cup. We also, to conclude, some of the concerns that you might have heard about, performance testing results showed that the low-dose tip was delivering an accurate dose, negative 2.9% to positive 10.47%, with a 95% confidence interval. We found this to be substantially equivalent to standard orientation enteral syringes and perform better than other reverse systems out there. We've also found in our studies that use of an adapter, such as a straw, provides even better performance than a cup fill. And so if you're looking for dose accuracy that's even greater than 10 or 9%, then you should use a drop straw or some type of a medication bottle adapter. From a misconnection risk assessment, it mitigates the risk of tubing misconnection that provides a clinical benefit that outweighs the risk of its use. We found that from a usability standpoint, no significant differences versus current practice. And then it's also important to note at this point, the FDA has thoroughly reviewed and cleared, actually, sorry, as of this week, 3 510K submissions for ENFit low-dose tip syringes. So we're feeling good about the solution that we have in place. From a best practices standpoint, we believe the low-dose tip male lumen behaves similarly to the male nozzle on a standard male syringe. One thing that we want to be clear, though, is that you need to make sure that when you are filling from a cup, there is a potential for medication filling up in the moat area of the syringe, and that's the green part over here. So we recommend, just as you would flick a syringe to remove the air bubbles, you're also flicking that syringe for now a new purpose, and that is to remove any fluid from the moat. And that's a best practice to ensure delivery of an accurate dose. In terms of the transition timing, we are recommending the introduction of ENFit feeding tubes and syringes as soon as possible with adequate supply to meet your patient and healthcare needs. This is a launch that is occurring throughout the globe, and so North America, the introduction is occurring now, as well as in Europe, Middle East, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. We do have reports from hospitals, I believe 15 or so hospitals in New Zealand and Australia, hundreds of hospitals in the United Kingdom and in the Netherlands, and other transitions in process in other parts of Europe and the Middle East. You should expect to see in South America, Asia, and other parts of the world that the introduction might be delayed into 2017. Shouldn't say delayed, actually timed such that those regulatory bodies tend to have longer cycles in terms of review, and so you should expect to see those coming in 2017. I apologize for my cough. Recommendations are to work with your cross-functional teams within your provider systems, and then, of course, work with your supplier representatives to understand what products are available, what the item numbers are, will they change, and make sure that they have the right components that you need. And specifically, syringes, these are key components to the ENFit transition, so it's essential that you have an ENFit tip syringe before you place your first feeding tube with an ENFit tip on the end. And in smaller sizes, certainly 3 ml and less, possibly a 5 ml, you should have an ENFit low-dose tip if you're delivering small doses of medication. And that's important to check with your supplier representative on their recommendations from that standpoint. And very, very important to verify adequate supply to meet your ongoing needs. I also recommend that you all, if you haven't done so, visit stayconnected.org. There's lots of helpful tips, FAQs, and all kinds of materials that you can download. And you can also sign up for newsletters for any updates. And those are some of the materials we have. That's it on my end.
Thanks very much. Learned a lot there. I do have a question here. It says there are some vendors that have not adapted the ENFit guidelines. When will this be mandatory? Is the recommendation to only work with vendors that have ENFit specifications?
That would be the recommendation, yes. It's an excellent question. Certainly from the mandate standpoint, it is something that is a law in the state of California. As far as I know, there's no other laws in any other state or any other country, for that matter, in terms of a absolute deadline or requirement. However, we do know that hospital systems, GPOs, we know that regulatory bodies are looking to make this a standard and a requirement for bid and tender systems. United Kingdom and the NHS, for example, are mandating this switch. So if you're a supplier and you want to have product in the hospital, that you need to have the ENFit system. So it does depend on the country and where you are located. In Canada, I would say there's no set hard and fast rule that you have to apply. I think we all need to keep in mind, though, that we want a safer system, and we want a system that's all compatible with each other. So if there's a supplier out there that's not going to be compatible with ENFit, you have to look hard and fast at whether that system that they have is going to be a safer system to avoid the tubing misconnections. What we can say is that if it's a supplier that does have ENFit, that they will be compatible with other suppliers. We know there's several components within a feeding system, and you need to rely on several suppliers to make a system work. So I would strongly encourage you to look for suppliers that carry ENFit systems and components to ensure that they're going to be compatible going forward.
Great. Thanks very much. We're going to take a couple more questions before we go on to the next presenter, but I have a question here. It says, will there be syringe caps available that will fit the ENFit syringes for hospitals who unit dose their liquid medications?
I would say the simple answer is yes. The standard answer for me is always check with your supplier to see what their plans are. I've seen lots of examples of caps that come with the syringe or even sold separately so that they would be available for pharmacy use, for use as they're sent up the floor. I've seen lots of examples of caps that are available.
Great. So we'll take one more question before we move forward. What is your suggestion on drawing up medication from a med cup when it is thicker consistency, like multivitamins? I don't think that the straw connector to this syringe will allow for us to draw all the meds up.
I think that's a great question. I would still attempt to use the straw. I think that is going to provide the ability to draw up the med, or in this case the vitamin and minerals, in a way that's going to be keep them very clean and allow the delivery. When it's thicker formulas, when we did the usability, I did find that it's not necessarily a problem, but it does get to be a little bit the fluid kind of gunks up a little bit. And so when you can use a straw or a medication fill cap on the end of medication bottle fill cap, that's just going to allow for a cleaner drop of either the meds or the vitamins and minerals. So you might be surprised at its effectiveness to be able to do that.
Great, thanks very much, Tom. We're going to move over to our Winnipeg colleagues now, and we'll answer the rest of the questions following this presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. This is Gina Rempel. I'm here in the same room with Mary Ellen Lee, and we're going to start the conversations with you about some of the side effects of the ENFit implementation. And this is in no way meant to minimize the safety implications and all the benefits that will come from the ENFit connector safety, but we know that we use enteral feeding tubes and the connectors and adapters that go with them for other purposes than feeding. So we want to highlight some of the challenges to our existing practice when ENFit is fully implemented. And as I said, start wondering with you how we can best meet the needs that will become evident to us in our hospital practices as well as our home care settings. And also to look at how we can best work with industry when there are gaps in our product lines, some of which will be created through the safety measures generated through the ENFit process. I'll hand it over to Mary Ellen Lee to demonstrate some of these issues for you.
Thank you, Gina. I feel safe using the word MacGyver now, but in healthcare, I think we, by nature, we're inventive. We engineer new equipment, and we wouldn't be as far advanced in the healthcare system as we are. And we know our patients are getting more complex and have more diverse needs. So MacGyvering can be defined as the act of rigging things together to make it work. And but along with that comes some safety concerns, right? Sometimes our solutions create new risks and that we have to be aware of and working forward. So the next section, I'm going to confess a few of our practices here in our program. The first off-label use that we probably use the most of is for gastric drainage. And here we have a little picture of a setup that we use. So we have a surgical drain that we attach to an extension set for a feeding tube that we can then use to connect to a nasogastric tube or a gastrostomy tube. And just to point out again that with this, knowing that with ENFit, this end will change and this end will change. So this may not be an option in the future. So what solutions do we have to meet this need? Another example is a specimen trap. We alter this. This is popular in our critical care area because it's easy to connect to the side of the bed. We can visually see the amounts that's being drained, and we often need something like this when our kids are intubated and ventilated. So again, we alter the specimen trap to make the connection happen. One of the things that we do, because we're always worried about things falling off, is you'll often see waterproof tape used to secure this connection. And with use of that kind of tape, there's the infection control risks, but also when infants and young children are more active, we know these things go in their mouths, and we have heard stories about are patients swallowing the pink tape or the waterproof tape and are having to fish it out of mouths. So again, huge safety risks sometimes with that practice. For older children with larger drainage, we often see, I've put the example here of the leg Foley bag. We have this SIMS connector that's tapered on both ends that allow us to connect the bag, collection bag, to the NG or our gastric tube. And again, you'll often see pink tape around these areas to help to secure it. My next slide is a young lady that we see often here. She's actually getting ready to go off to school, and you can see this a lot in older patients or adults. She's carrying a lot of load here just to meet one of her needs. She's continually on gastric drainage, and so this bag works in the sense that, you know, I can hook up onto her walker or onto her chair during the day, and for short walks she can hold it and walk with her. But that's a lot for her to carry, and again, as she gets older, she may have some concerns about her peers seeing this happen. Post-surgery or for a variety of reasons, we often have to connect for suction, for drainage. And again, very similar, we use the SIMS adapter here in the middle to connect the Enteral device to the suction machine, and again, often secured with pink tape. But in the future with ENFit, how are we going to do business? Feeding tubes weren't made for drainage. It's considered an off-label use, but I certainly know we have challenges finding drainage devices that would allow us to feed and drain, and for a variety of reasons we're jumping back and forth between feeding and suction drain or straight drainage. To go way beyond the conversation about the gastric system, I will confess I've never worked in the operating room. I have had the opportunity to observe a few operating procedures, and so what I'm aware of as far as practices, I do know our nasogastric tubes are used for some of our urology procedures, and rumor has it that some of our neurosurgeons use this postoperatively, the nasogastric tubes, for as surgical drains. So I think we need to extend the conversations to our perioperative team members and wonder what they're using, if they're using it, and are they aware that when ENFit comes into place, how we do business may not be able to happen in the future.
So just to draw to a conclusion and open up the section of wondering together how we're going to meet these needs, we just want to reiterate that ENFit is, of course, a great advance in the feeding world and will contribute in a major way to patient safety and decrease misconnections and eliminate some of the tragedies that have happened in the past with the misconnections. So it's time now for us to look at all the ways that we use feeding tubes in different ways and start planning how we can meet the needs of our patients in hospital and home care settings safely. And also time to start advocating for our needs to both manufacturers and suppliers to ensure that all the bases are covered. We know that necessity is the mother of invention, and with a lot of creative people around, we'll be able to solve some of these ancillary uses of feeding tubes in a safe manner. The question marks are on the screen remind Mary Ellen and me that we have many more questions than answers for you, and we would welcome some time of sharing and wondering together how we might be able to meet some of these challenges. Thanks very much for the opportunity of talking to you all.
Great, thanks, Gina and Mary Ellen. You raised some really interesting points and some issues that I think are probably shared across the other healthcare organizations. So I'm just going to encourage people, if you have some other solutions or other stories that you'd like to share around those, or other questions or ideas about meeting some of these challenges, just type them into your question pane. There was actually, somebody did ask a question directly related to what you presented on about how will this work now. So I can see that it is an issue for others as well. So I do have one question here. I think it's more for Tom. So will there be bottle adapters that are compatible with the ENFit system to draw medication from bulk bottles?
Hi, this is Lisa here. Tom is obviously under the weather a little bit, and he tends to cough every time he starts talking. So I'm going to be answering the questions, and if there's something that he needs to step in on, he's right here too. So in regards to the bottle adapters, yes, there will be bottle adapters, and something that is coming out that I think will help tremendously in regards to preparing ENFit medication, preparation for ENFit, whether that's a bottle adapter, a straw. We just shot a video, and it has all the new components of what you guys are currently using in practice and what everything looks like now to adopt the ENFit transition. So that should be, the infographic should be on our website next week, and then there's going to be a video, an interactive video of the ways to fill syringes coming soon, and it will be available in 7 different languages. We never put a timeline to it, but I want to say within the next 2 weeks it should be on our website.
Great, and that's just a great reminder to everybody to check out the stayconnected.org website, where you can find all of this information as they update things in real time. So there will always be new information for you there. So I am wondering if some of the other hospitals online, if they have the same sort of questions as Winnipeg, or if they have any solutions. Do they have other workarounds that maybe that they're coming up with, or do you see that maybe this is another conversation, a bigger conversation, that we need to bring some of our CAFC maybe needs to bring some of our leads from the children's hospitals together to try to come up with some solutions. I don't know if Lisa at ENFit, I'm not sure if you can answer this, but have these questions come to you already? These sorts of issues and
yeah, in regards to like the MacGyvering and the straight drainage, the Foley bags, and all of that, because we're not clinicians, we're not going to have a direct answer. But what GEDSA does have is we have supply chain meetings, hospital meetings every month, where we are brought with in the purchasing organizations, where we bring questions to the table for use. So when it comes to a question or something, I think everything that was in this slide would be helpful to tell GEDSA. Let us know that you're having a problem with this, and we'll bring it back to all the clinicians that we have behind us and kind of have a roundtable discussion on, okay, so we have this problem, what's the solution? So if instead of just figuring out for yourself, you can get feedback from other people. So these questions, next supply chain meeting, we can bring them up. So that's something that GEDSA can offer to everyone.
That's great, and I think that if there are some other questions that can't be answered today, if people want to forward them to us, or maybe to the GEDSA website directly, we could facilitate some of that.
Absolutely.
So I have another question here. It says, what about the needs if a feeding tube falls out when needing to reinsert a tube into the tract before closing? But often the tract will quickly be preserved by a urological catheter. There are so many style feeding tubes. not.
So this is Gina in Winnipeg. I think that's a correct observation that sometimes if a feeding tube has fallen out and there isn't another replacement of either a skin level device or a trifunnel balloon tube available, people do use either NG tubes or use Foley catheters. And of course the connection, those aren't meant to connect to feeding sets, so those would be at risk for misconnections and should be changed as quickly as possible to feeding tubes as such. But sometimes it's inevitable that you have to keep a stoma open and you have to put something in it, but those shouldn't be used for feeding if at all possible to avoid the misconnections and ensure the safety.
That's great. Thanks very much for that. I'm just going to ask you, are there any more questions out there? We're getting a couple coming in, so I'm just going to encourage people, questions, thoughts, and comments. So, has anyone had experience with the use of Neomed Gravity Pro oral syringe with a vent zone and integrated hanger for oral or enteral use? So I don't know if Gina or Mary Ellen, if that's something you can.
That's not something we're familiar with. That's not something we're currently using and is not provided by our current vendor.
Okay. So maybe there's other people in the audience who might have experience with that. So it says, you talked about off-label use. Is such an off-label use also possible using the new system? Example of venting the stomach.
There will be challenges. So that's one of my areas of most concern. I think in the extended transition phase, the short-term adapter that we saw on Tom's slide will be available. So there's time to talk about this. But my understanding yet there is not yet approved dual-purpose tube. So meaning there's not a tube available on the market right now. That means we can do drain and feed through the same lumen. So it was very common. It's a common practice that I've heard of, and until I actually started talking about ENFit, I didn't realize that was an off-label use. But that is one thing we have to have more conversations about, because that will be a challenge.
Great. So some vendors don't have ENFit specs or trying to reassure hospitals that their versions are as safe. What issues do you see with this, if any? So I don't know if Lisa can answer that.
In regards to vendors that don't have ENFit, or is it more that the manufacturers that they usually use, maybe one would be that is not adapting to ENFit would be BD. In regards to what if they don't, it's kind of, we have such a large group of industry leaders adapting to ENFit, and right now some of them might be not communicating that their ENFit products are ready because they have not done their trials and all that, but there is a significant amount of manufacturers that do have their ENFit products, and to encourage, I think GEDSA is encouraging to look into different options if needed to start this transition, so you have time with those transition connectors to kind of get ready when everybody does transition. So when it comes to MacGyvering, you'll be kind of a little bit more ahead of the game instead of scrambling to find solutions. So GEDSA does recommend trying to find a supplier and start the trials with the ENFit connectors, and it can be assured that manufacturers, large industry manufacturers, will be switching over to the ENFit connectors.
It's Mary Ellen here. I'm thinking about Robin and her story, and I often think it will only take one, and they have happened. So I just think about the her story and the impact, and if that was to happen at your hospital, in your facility. So I think for all the safety reasons, we do need to move ahead as soon as possible, because we're all dealing with this risk currently that a misconnection can happen at any moment.
Yeah, so it says this manufacturer has their own version of a safety connector and is not planning on and going to the ENFit model. So I'm not sure. Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think it has to be back to our organizations to reflect on that. I think this is an international standard that collectively industry and care providers have brainstormed on. So I think it has to be, when you look at do we meet the standards or not, really evaluate how that fits with that bigger industry standard, and is this company meeting the industry standards that have been set internationally.
This is Gina. One thing that isn't changing, which I was concerned a little bit about, and I wonder if Lisa can comment on that from a GEDSA perspective, the on the skin level devices, the balloon skin level devices, the slip tip syringe that's used to fill the balloon is not changing, and that will continue to be a standard 10 ml slip tip syringe. And we've been told that that won't change because it won't connect to anything else, but that remains a bit of a concern of mine. Is that something that GEDSA is looking to address as well?
In regards to skin level devices and the slip tip syringe, we have not, that's something that it has not been brought to our attention yet, and that is something that is great to hear now, and that's why GEDSA is doing these webinars, so we can hear these things and bring them back to the manufacturers, so the manufacturers are there, they compete with each other, but they're all coming together for this standard. But in the end, so they're going to find the best solution for you. As long as we hear the problems, we send them back to the manufacturers and they combat the problems. So right now, we haven't heard about that, but that's something that I just noted and we can bring up to everybody.
Yeah. Also to note, those slip tip syringes fit very easily into some of the needleless ports on IV tubing.
Yeah, that's the concern, that we have those dirty syringes because they're used to fill balloons, and they are available then at bedsides if the parents keep the syringes there, or nurses have syringes, the slip tip syringes around to check the balloons. So that's a potential for error and a safety risk.
Okay.
Great. So another question here. Has there been experience with leaking of the ENFit connector when products from different manufacturers have been used?
We've heard a couple of things with leaking, but I think manufacturers have taken that into consideration, and I don't want to say that they remanufactured or released new products by any means. I don't want to speak for any manufacturer, but that problem seems to have subsided. But if you are experiencing that, reaching out to that manufacturer to let them know that would best answer that question, because I'm speaking for the larger group of the manufacturers, but overall within everyone we haven't seen leakage. But if it's one manufacturer that you see is leaking a lot, it'd be best to go back to them.
Great. So there's also a question about liability. So would there not be liability issues for hospitals if ENFit is available and hospitals choose not to use it?
ENFit, I think that goes back to the chance of tubing misconnections, and that there is a standard now for ENFit for Enteral. So if hospitals choose to adapt it, not adopt it, that's their choice. But if a misconnection does happen, I feel as though you could think of what may occur from not choosing to adopt.
Yeah, I think that's a That's a safe answer. Yeah. So just to remind everybody that the presentation is recorded, and the page, the link, you'll receive the link to the page with the recording and any other materials that the presenters want to provide to us. You can also join a conversation on that page and write in any comments or questions, extra comments or questions you might have after the session today. I don't see any more questions coming in. I just want to ask our presenters if you have a final word or a final message that you'd like to send out to the group.
This is Gina. I'm really grateful for Lisa to be mentioning that we can email our concerns to GEDSA, and they will be taken forward to manufacturers and suppliers so that our concerns can be addressed. Lisa, should we send these separately from the presentation today, or will those have been noted?
I've noted a lot of them, but if you would like to send them, you're more than happy to. And something that I did want to say to everyone is that change is hard, and adopting something new is not the easiest, but as long as you have a cross-functional team and you're aware of the transition and know that GEDSA is an outlet to voice your frustrations and that we're trying to internationally do this all together, I hope that kind of eases any frustration, and we're always an outlet for everyone.
That's great. Thank you so much. And it is good to know that there's a place to have these questions addressed, and to know that you're not out there alone. So if we want to facilitate, if you have questions through CAFC, we can send them to GEDSA for you, or you can send them to them directly. Probably they have an info at GEDSA. So we'll post some of those links for you, and I just want to thank all of our presenters. It was great, very informative, good discussion. A lot of great questions came out of there, and I think that we'll have to revisit these things in the near future to see how this all rolls out. So just to remind everybody that we do our webinars every Wednesday at 11 a.m. and it's always great if you can watch live, as your questions and comments really enrich the discussion, just like today. But if you can't watch live, the recordings of these sessions are made available after the fact on our Knowledge Exchange network. So next week on October 5th, we'll be hearing about stepping up the HYPE, integrating mental health care services. HYPE stands for Healthy Young People Everywhere. It's an international knowledge translation platform designed to be a mechanism to integrate national efforts and to link with partners internationally. So this webinar will examine the status of youth mental health and health care in Canada and describe the integrated stepped care model currently being promoted in 5 provinces. Furthermore, our panelists will present the British Columbia Integrated Youth Services Initiative as an exemplar of the model and discuss findings related to the youth engagement process. And the following week, on October 12th, we'll welcome Dr. Matthew Bromwich from the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario for a session called Thinking Differently, Navigating Research, Business, and Innovation. Dr. Bromwich will pull from his own experience researching, developing, and marketing several medical devices, and will discuss the concept of private sector collaboration within the broader public health care sector. So always some great things coming up, and thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you back here next week.